Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's stream. Thank you very much for joining us here at the Sydney Game Developers Meetup, um, a virtual meetup in this case, instead of what we normally do in the Wargaming Kitchen in Ultimo. But the benefit, of course, is that you can watch this from anywhere and it will be available afterwards as well. How good is that? Um, okay, I can see a few people have joined us in the stream. Welcome. Tonight we're going to have Bilal from the Sydney studio and also from Doodah Games, his own indie label, giving us a breakdown on game jams. Everything you ever wanted to know about game jams, but were afraid to ask. He will be telling you the whole thing. Bilal is a hardcore game jammer. You'll find out more about that as he goes on, but I'll let him tell you all about that. Just some ground rules for tonight. If you do have questions, please save them to the end. We will have a question and answer session, probably about 15 minutes once Bilal's presentation finishes. And then I'll be putting a link to the Games with the Wings Discord server into the chat. If you want to follow us over there, Bilal will be there as well to answer any other questions for a while. So that is it from me. Please, everyone, be nice in the chat. I do have the ban hammer ready for anyone who's rude, so please don't. And I will now pass you over to Bilal, and he will get started with his presentation.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Paul. So I'm Bilal. I'll be talking about game jams. So we're jamming, making the most of your game jam experience. This is again brought to you by Wargaming, and thanks Games with Wings. I'll be in the Discord after that, so you can join there. So a bit of a self intro. I'm Bilal Akil. That's my little family. And I'm an ex-corporate programmer, so startups, telcos, doing things like websites, apps, backends, whatever. And I used to be a part-time academic, did computer science, and I did some research in cloud computing. But now I'm a senior software engineering at Wargaming, and I'm also making indie games with Doodad Games. That's when I'm not actually busy playing Path of Exile and Dota 2, which doesn't leave me that much time. So, what's coming up in this talk? I'll talk about what a game jam is, why you should consider doing game jams if you're interested in growing as a game developer. The meat of the talk will be some effective jam breakdowns. So I'll be talking through a few of my game jam experiences, what made them work as well or not as well as they did, and things that you can take away from them to help you grow in similar ways. And then I'll wrap it up with a conclusion. The jam breakdowns, I'll be going through three of them for these three games. So you've got Unitower, Repair Keats, Neanderthal from years 2019 and 2020. And they range from me working solo up to a group of four. So a good variety of experience, hopefully, to be useful for you. So getting on with the show, what's a game jam? It's a contest, and it sometimes has prizes involved, not always. I put contest in quotes there because that's not always the important thing for a lot of people, myself included. I'm not there to win. I'm more enjoying the experience and the challenge of it. It's done either individually or as a group. Sometimes that's part of the game jam rules. So Ludum Dare has a version where they require you to be solo. Usually it's optional. Other times, you're actually allowed to be a member of multiple groups. So Global Game Jam, for instance, has kind of roaming musicians, which make music and sounds for multiple groups, which is really cool. Sometimes the game jams are done in person, naturally less these days, but Global Game Jam used to provide accommodation, in quotes, where you could bring your own sleeping bag and crash it under the desk on location. So you really get that kind of jam feel, just no one's leaving, just work as much as you can. Online jams usually allow international participation. So GMTK Jam, which I really enjoy, is based in UK time. That's where the organizers are. And that can be helpful, actually, being in a different time zone. So that's just an interesting thing. And the goal of the game jam is to make a game, usually from scratch. I put it in quotes again because you don't really do anything from scratch these days. You can use a game engine. You can usually use various music, sounds, fonts if you have the license to, but the rules may change per jam. And usually there are certain themes and constraints applied. So you'll see some of the themes as examples in when I talk about my jams and what kind of constraints. I've got a slide for that. The typical one is the time constraint. This can be as little as 3 hours. The typical is 48 and 72 hours. And you could imagine making a game from scratch in this short duration is really, really intense. So you're crunching. But it also can get a lot longer. There's 1 week, 1 month, sometimes even longer, 2 months, which is much more relaxed. It's not as crunchy, so to speak. And there are other kinds of constraints: paint jam, text only jam. These are constraints on the visual style. SNESDev and DOS game jams are constraints on the platform that the game needs to run on. So bad it's good is a constraint on kind of the nature of the game. You're making a troll game or a game that looks like rubbish, and that's the funny part of it. So there's all kinds of game jams, and you can find them on itch.io. They've got a great directory of jams, this massive calendar. But these aren't all just like indie niche jams like I showed just then. There's also massive ones like Unreal's Epic Mega Jam and GMTK Jam, which is some of the biggest out there, all on itch.io. So that's a great place to start. For the remainder of the talk, however, I'll be focusing on short duration game jams. The long ones are still valuable. A lot of the benefits still apply, but the nature of the beast is different. So some of the specific strategies I say might not apply as well. But you should consider them for your lifestyle better. So why should you consider game jamming? Firstly, the constraints can actually help. The time and theme and other constraints can help guide your creativity. It can help motivate you if you struggle like me with juggling too many projects. The idea of having just a weekend to do just one thing and it's finished, that can actually be a big help. It's good fun. Naturally, I'm sure most people you ask who've jammed will say they had fun. And you meet a lot of people, you'll make new friends, you'll be more a part of the indie dev community, which is awesome. And this leads into networking. So I met a link to Wargaming in my first game jam. When I was going through my interviews at Wargaming, someone was able to put a good word for me because I jammed with them. It was awesome. Thanks, Luke. And I also met the partner for one of my indie games. We continued working together outside the jam on a new game, and we've been working on that for like 2 years. Viking Trickshot is a beast that just drags on. Other kinds of things: portfolio building. Naturally, you're completing work that you can show. I've done this, and this really helps with your self-confidence. You can surprise yourself with how much you can get done in just a weekend, for example. And another one, this was especially relevant for me personally, is that it helps to destroy perfectionism. So I had a problem where I spent years programming, but I didn't really have anything to show for it because I always felt it wasn't good enough, or it's not quite ready yet. And so I had a pretty much empty portfolio despite all my work. But game jams were one piece of the puzzle that helped me break down that kind of destructive characteristic, and now I'm much better off because of that. So there's also the direct skill development, whether you're a programmer or an artist or a musician. This can help you with your craft, whether that's professionally or as a hobby. You're developing prototyping skills. You need to, in a short time, express a very specific concept, and you need to make that quickly. You can't beat around the bush and do unimportant things. It also gives you opportunity to really focus and work quickly. Like compared to my day job, or just most cases in general, I'm never really that focused as much as I am in a game jam. So it's a really interesting experience for you to just have that laser focus. You're also developing time and scope management skills. You can't kind of get sucked too deep into rabbit holes, or you're going to sacrifice the overall game and you might end up with nothing. So you really need to keep tabs on yourself. Am I overdoing this? It's time to cut back. And with scope, it's all about cutting back from the get-go. You need to think, what can I practically get done in this time? And this will help you learn your own limits, and you'll be able to apply that in your own work moving forward. And the point I've got at the bottom on specific experiments is a way you can utilize game jams if you want to specifically learn a certain topic. So if you're a musician, maybe you want to learn a specific instrument. If you're a game designer, maybe you want to apply a specific technique in your game design. You can use a single jam as a kind of playground for that. And you'll find in a short duration, you'll ramp up on that technique or whatever it is extremely quickly, and you'll get a lot of experience in it in a very short time. I'll have an example for that coming up. Moving on now to the meat of it with the effective jam breakdowns. So I'm going to go through a few games. I'm going to give an intro to the game jam and the game itself, so you have a bit of context as I go through the jam timeline. So I'll be going through the time spent in the jam at a high level and highlight some key moments throughout it, and then apply those to these key takeaways. So these are the things that I'm hoping can benefit you, things to think about when you jam yourself. So without further ado, I'll get into that with Unitower. So Unitower was from GMTK Game Jam 2019. It was a 48-hour jam, which I did solo. So I did pretty much everything except create the music to a degree. So what is the game? I'll just play this trailer. It's a tower defense. You click and towers pop up. The towers shoot enemies that stream from the right to the left. And you can see there's different colors there. So it starts off basic, no colors. The towers you put block them, and the different colors have different effects. They're kind of like environmental effects. Red burns them, blue slows them. And here you can see that it has a random generation feature. So I didn't really spend a lot of time making heaps of different content and new levels for it. I utilized randomization to fill that void. So that's what it is in a nutshell, a little tower defense with environmental effects and randomization for generated levels. So let's start going through the timeline. First thing I got done was the idea and scope. I spent some time brainstorming and came up with this tower defense idea, and then I drilled down to the scope. What am I actually planning to make in this tower defense? I was able to fit it all on one slide. So the Game Jam's theme was only one, and you can see how this has been worked into the scope. You can click anywhere on the grid to place the only one type of tower. The tower shoots for only one damage. The towers can block enemy pathing, so you can use that to kind of make the enemies move in a maze to get to the one side to the other. There's only one type of enemy that just moves from right to left and gains life and speed over time. There's a random level generator, and it includes randomly placed walls. And this is the environmental effects, the kind of unique twist on the tower defense. Grid tiles can have effects on towers, enemies, or projectiles. So that's the slow, the burn, the speed. That's where the kind of unique thing comes in. And the last thing I wanted was for the game to actually have a tutorial so players could get onboarded. So I decided that was a problem I wanted to solve as part of the game. And the thing I want to pull out of this, you can see a few things in bold. Global range for simplification. So towers didn't have a tower range. I found this was something I could pull out of the scope, and it would just mean one less thing for me to do. Same with enemies. There's in brackets there, no waves. The enemies just streamed constantly. There wasn't a definition of wave 2, 3, 4. And this was another simplification I found. And the reason I decided to do the random level generator was so I didn't need to spend time making content myself. So I found ways to embed shortcuts even into the scope of the project. And this just meant there was that much less work for me to do, and really helped me to actually get over that finish line and make the jam as effective as it was. So moving on, just a few hours later, we're still pretty early on the first day. I already had a whole kind of visual design and UI before there was any game at all. I kind of started with a picture frame, so to speak, before going into it and doing the painting. And I found this super helpful because it kind of acted as a mold for the final game. It helped me clearly envision the direction I was going and where things would end up, how the player would interact with things, and that kind of helped me streamline my work. So I think this worked really well, and it's something I try to do in future jams as well. And so that's one of the takeaways that perhaps you can consider. Flying through, a few hours later, we've got enemies going from right to left. They move around walls, and you can lose, go back to the menu, and you have that loop. Halfway through the first day, we've now got the player. They can click and put towers. The towers shoot and kill enemies. And you can win if you kill enough enemies. So we've got the whole basic gameplay loop at this point already, just none of the juicy stuff yet. That comes in a bunch of hours later, a solid 7.5 hour block of work. We have all the gameplay I wanted, all the different environmental effects, and their corresponding tutorials. That's pretty much a massive chunk of the scope done. And you can see I'm not doing any tangents. I'm just smashing out that scope directly. After a good nap, and then I finish it off with a level generation. And that's it. The scope is done. We're a quarter of the way through the second day, and I'm done technically of what I wanted to do. So that was awesome. I felt, woohoo, can't believe that worked. And what did I do next? That's when I took time to polish things, starting with music sound effects, Googled a few matching royalty-free songs and generated some chiptune sounds with some nifty software. And then I spent a huge chunk of time on visual effects. Now we're getting close to the end of the jam. I added some tower firing effects, particles wherever I could, camera shake, these kinds of things. And these combined with the music and sound effects made a huge difference to how the game felt. It suddenly felt a lot more like a real game, even though I just spent the last half a day not changing the gameplay at all. It made it feel that much better. So that's another takeaway. You always want to make sure you do polish in your game jam to some degree. Here I spent half a day. That was amazing. Maybe you won't be able to spend that much, but even a little bit makes it feel so much better. So make sure you have that opportunity. So with that done, the next thing I did was expand the scope. I did everything I wanted to, and I managed to polish. So now I pulled some extra stuff in. I added custom level support, so players could write some JSON and paste it in and create their own levels. And I don't know if anyone ended up using this, but this was one of the things on my list of ideas, which I cut out of the scope. And I'm like, hang on, I actually want to try this now. And that was, I felt safe doing that because I'd already ticked all the boxes beforehand. So this is a great way that you could pull scope back in later. And that's it. It was finished. So the first feeling at the end was like, oh my God, I did this. How the hell did I do this in one weekend? That's crazy. And it just felt so unreal that I had got so much done. But the key takeaways here is the effective scoping that made it work so well. I minimized tangents as early as I could, even just from writing the bullet points in the scope. And then at the end, once I ticked all those boxes, it was safe to expand the scope and try something more experimental. I also had the end in mind from the get-go. So that UI mold that I described really helped me to visualize things and just kind of put the blocks in their place. Pop, pop, pop. It's all there. It works. The players can use it as envisioned. That worked really well. And also, the scope was small enough that it gave me that meaningful time to apply polish. So when you're thinking of the scope of your game, try to account for that. Try to leave some time. You don't want to completely fill it and lose the ability to polish your game because that's really important. And the results showed here. This was the outcome. GMTK was ranked, and I was ranked 89 out of 2,600. And that was me performing solo in comparison to many groups out there. So that's that kind of confidence boost that I was describing. When things go well and you surprise yourself, it just feels awesome. Cool. On to Repair Keats was part of Global Game Jam 2020, so another 48-hour jam, which was full on. This was the one where I brought my sleeping bag, and yeah, this was a group plus a roaming musician. So I won't go through everyone's names to save time, but we had a wide variety of disciplines in this group, which was exciting. And I'll just shout out that Wargaming sponsored my attendance and some of my colleagues to this game jam as well. They gave us time off in lieu to attend, which was magnificent. It's awesome. And before moving on, I'll just kind of give a brief description of the game. Instead of those screenshots, I'm going to change screen and show you the actual game itself as it was during the game jam. So you've got these delightful pair birds, and this is a puzzle game where they're separated. You click on one and another, and they'll move to each other. Starts really simple. And you can see in this case, they're blocking each other. So part of the puzzle is how you move them out of the way to unblock each other and not block anyone else. And as you could imagine, it grows more complex over time. If I jump to level 12, But you can see it grows pretty big. And now we've got these two birds with these squiggly things. This is another mechanic where they kind of magically follow each other. Uh, so yeah, more things get involved. We've got a level designer here, which we kind of got for free. I'll explain that as we go. But that's the nature of this puzzle game. So let's jump into the timeline to see how this all came together. Starting with the scope. The theme for this game jam was repair. And what the scope essentially was we have a grid with stuff. When we did the scope, we didn't know that there'd be pair birds yet. There were things, and they can move to each other, assuming nothing's blocking the path. And they'll meet in the middle of wherever the two of them were. And you win or you solve the puzzle when all the pairs meet in the middle. Some things can move, so not everything needs to be paired. Some things can be a tool just to move, but aren't part of the goal. And then you have walls, which just prevent movement. And we'd be able to add arbitrary other mechanics as we think of them and have time later. So that was the idea. And a couple hours later, we wanted to evolve that idea from just gameplay to what does it actually look like? What are the people interacting with here? So we did more brainstorming, and that's where we came up with the concept of reparakeets, where you're repairing pairs of parakeets, which are pairs. And it was a monstrous pun. I absolutely loved it. That's what game jams are about, the puns. You need to get your puns in there. So that was good fun. But meanwhile, as that discussion on the theme was going on, I was also talking with a level designer about how we want to represent levels. How do we want to create them in a more streamlined way? And we came up with this textual representation of the grid in the game, where we could use dots and letters, and that would express what a level is. And doing it so early was really beneficial here because that meant the level designer, we had Josh Jacobs as a dedicated level designer. He did it full time for the jam. He was able to get started on this straight away. Before we still had an empty Unity project, but he could just open up Excel and start doing it. He could dot it on paper, and that was really awesome. It was a super effective way to collaborate. Moving forward, the team went off, head home to sleep, and I went getting that textual representation and passing it into a grid in Unity. So started connecting the dots there, and by 5 or so a.m., I actually completed the scope ridiculously. It's halfway through the first day, and technically the game is done. So I was able to create a set of levels and move the birds, which in this case are circles or cylinders, together, and it would know when the game is over. And it was like, what? How the hell did I do that so quickly? But again, it's because it was such a small scope that was like, click, click, it's done. I then took a nap, and by the time the team came back and I got back in action, we suddenly had 9 levels, which were all defined from Excel. We just plopped them into the game because we had that text editor, and we had our bird models and also our hedgehogs. So things started flying together really quickly. We've also got that nice that background image. It looks a bit weird now. It'll come together later. By the time we reach the halfway mark, we've got fully animated birds. They had various different animations, and this was an opportunity for me to collaborate with the modeler and the animator, because I needed to hook up those animations to the game logic. So I was learning more about how they're structured from Maya and how they're imported into Unity, and what I need to do on my end to make the game actually use them. And then we had Tim doing tech art. He set up this awesome looking toon shader. And so Tim and the artist were working, how can we texture the birds so it looks good with the toon shader and we can swap out the textures. So there was a lot of this cross-discipline interaction going on, which was really awesome. And a lot of the things I learned from these interactions have benefited me in my indie journey, even when I'm working on my own, because of how much more I understand those individual roles. So this was really great working with this team. A few hours later, we've got lighting, and suddenly everything looks so much better. That background, I couldn't really, if I go back a couple slides, like I couldn't really see it here. Like the background didn't look great to me. I didn't really understand. But then the lighting got turned on, and I was like, "What the hell? How did that happen?" So that was really sick to see. Everyone took a nap again. And before people got back in, since I was sleeping under the desk, but they were traveling home, I managed to squeeze in the new gameplay mechanic. So the entanglement, which you saw where the birds are following each other. And so that was something new the level designer could work with as I came back on. The next bunch of hours, the main thing I could show was the UI, but I spent a lot of time just connecting the dots with the work that the artist and the tech artist were doing for animations and hover effects and things like this. But a big thing was the UI. You can see I went from earlier we just had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That was it. Now on the left we had a kind of wireframe for the UI, and on the right is when we skinned it and made it look pretty, and it's just so much better. And just after that, we had our final set of 20 levels, and it was pretty cool seeing the level designer work his magic. It was pretty methodological. That's a tricky word. But he didn't just like come up with levels, jot them down, move on. He had a process, thought about the kind of experience the user will have moving through the game. And he even found other people in the game jam to bounce the levels off of. People want breaks. So he pulled some of his friends across and got them to play from different teams and see how they experienced it and tweaked it in response. Some levels were too hard, and he found it could make it more reasonable with a tweak or two. And it was really cool seeing that actual methodology applied to the work. It's not just willy-nilly, this would be cool. So that's another example of that exposure to another discipline that I was able to benefit from in my further work, because now I can apply more of that when I have to, in the game, I'm wearing all the hats. I need to do that myself. And these new levels included that feature I made while everyone was still asleep. So we had a new mechanic involved. So that was another example of the pulling in some new scope and it fitting in once everything else was safe. We managed to squeeze in some last-minute tweaks right near the end of the jam. This included changing the music. The original track we got was a bit more grim than the game was because the musician couldn't quite envision the gameplay. So then when he got to see it, he's like, "Oh, I'll make another track. It's going to be much better." And it was, and we managed to squeeze that in right at the end. And we managed to squeeze in a lot more visual updates. You can see more things around there. There's leaves falling, there's little mushrooms on the side, rocks, trees. And so we managed a workflow where we could squeeze in a lot of those things at the last minute for submission. And so it was done. And the key takeaways is what the hell, artists are magic. We went from the left to the right in a single day. Like, what? But otherwise, the big thing here was that you can get a much better understanding of other game dev roles by collaborating with them. And you'll learn how to collaborate with them much more effectively, both on a behavioral level. So, for instance, communication, making sure that you're sharing enough depth of the problem that they know what they need to do to kind of like, yeah. So half of it is communication, just so everyone's on the same page and know how they can slot all their work together. But then there's also on the technical level, so the animator needed to know the right way to export the things from Maya so that they can be imported smoothly into Unity and deal with scaling and rotational issues. For instance, an example of a technical thing on my end was that text representation, which worked perfectly. That was a great collaboration tool. And that's a technical skill I can bring into my new games. So yeah, the collaboration skill definitely benefited here. And we also took this as an opportunity to continue working on the game. So the team was hyped. We made something awesome in 48 hours and wanted to keep it going. And there was also interest to attempt to commercialize it. And if it didn't work, we're still going to learn heaps about it. So that happened. Sadly, we renamed the game. The pun madness wasn't that receptive to commercialization. And so it's now Lonely Birds, which we just released on Steam earlier this month, over a year later. And we managed to progress that from 20 to 92 levels. And added a bunch more improvements in that mix. And a shameless plug, wishlists appreciated. You can Google Lonely Bird Steam. Thank you. Yeah. So that's Repair Kits. The last jam I'll talk about is Neanderthal. This is a kind of different story. It's not all rainbows and sunshine like the last two were, but there's still some really valuable takeaways here. So this was for GMTK Game Jam 2020. It's another 48-hour one. This is in UK time, so 5 a.m. to 5 a.m. And this was a group of two, Ethan, who's been making Viking Trick Shot with me, and myself. And this game, I'll tab over to show you. This is a puzzle platformer, I guess. But the big twist is that you don't do the platforming. So you can see the mouse here. I'm just going to play. And then Neil spawns here and walks off on his own. I didn't control him. I didn't press the buttons to walk. He's actually got a mind of his own, which you can see here. There's this sequence of arrows pointing. That's actually dictating Neil's movements. So if I play that, he's going to die. So what the gameplay is I have this set of puzzle pieces here, and I'm going to put it to fulfill the level so Neil can actually win. And I can hit next, and you can see this is a bit more complicated. He's going to fall. And now I have more puzzle pieces, so I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, and play again. And that's going to work. So that's the gameplay. But the big interesting part of this game jam experience is that it actually has a full level editor. I can create mod packs, hit new, create a new level, place some stuff around. I can even put multiple deals. Tell the player they have 5 puzzle pieces. And then if I go back to the menu, you'll see that mod I just made, and now I can play it not as an editor, just as a normal player. And the kicker is that you can actually log in and upload these mods, and on the other hand, download them and play them without leaving the game at all. And this was all done within the game jam. So that's Neanderthal, reverse puzzle platformer with mod support. Jumping into the scope. The theme for the game jam was out of control. And so the scope for this game was, it's a typical platformer. It has movement, jumping, bouncing, spikes, enemies, platformer business. The character, however, is out of the player's control. So that's where we tied the theme in. The character plays themselves using that predefined set of movements you saw, the sequence. And what the real player, not the character, needs to do is build the level to make Neil, the in-game character, win. And so the actual gameplay is a kind of loop of build, hit the play button, stop, and repeat until you solve the puzzle. And it was when I realized, hang on a sec, the gameplay is a level builder. I can take this further, can't I? And then I added to the scope. I'll make an actual level editor with mod.io support. So what's mod.io? I recently experienced it in a game called Tabs, Totally Accurate Battle Simulator. It was a way for players to create, mod.io was a way to share mods without leaving the game. And I just learned about that. I've never used it, but I was like, oh my God, I can see it. I can see it all coming together. It's the same logic to play the game and make the levels. And then I'll just add mod support. Boom, done. And so I decided I'm going to do that. This is going to be part of the scope. And so I went ahead with that. Halfway through the first day, I had mod.io fully integrated. So this was that big technical challenge I wanted. I'm learning a new tool. I've never used it before. I need to figure out their plugin, their API, all these things. And I actually did that in half a day. The problem is there's no gameplay. There's no game yet. I had mods which were just empty. It was just a placeholder, but I could download them and upload them and share them, which was awesome. But at this point, like in Repair Kits, I already finished the whole scope, but now I had no gameplay at all. And what I didn't know at the time is that this was also leaving me many bugs that I would be fixing throughout the game jam. But, got to move on, find a way to get through it. So on with the show. Almost near the end of the first day, and the art has gone far, far ahead of the gameplay. There's no meaningful gameplay yet, but we already have the spikes, we have the mushrooms, we've got the first enemy. So I'm falling way behind the artist here. Well, to his defense, Ethan is a freaking machine. I've never seen anyone produce art that quickly. So Now we're a quarter of the way through the second day. I'm finally just getting started on the real gameplay bits and pieces. We've got placing and deleting things. You can create and remove levels, which was a thing needed to get here. Halfway through the first day, we've got movement, so you can add that sequence, and you can start and stop play mode. So you've got that loop going, but there's still actually no meaningful gameplay. There's no puzzle pieces yet, so the player can't actually do anything. There's also no winning and losing. Now, 3/4 of the way, we're almost near the end of the second day. Finally, we achieve gameplay. So you could imagine this is really stressful. If you're getting so close to the end of the jam and you don't have a functional game yet, like you don't have anything that people can interact with. So finally made it here. You can set the player's puzzle pieces. Now you can go back to the menu, actually play the game, win, lose, move on to the next level. And this is where things got interesting. Because I had full mod.io integration, I took this opportunity. There's a full working game now. I built the game out and I sent it to my mates. And I told them, hey, I know it's midnight. I need you guys to pump out some levels for me. All right, we've got 3 hours. Go, go, go. Let's do it. 3 hours later, it's almost 4 a.m. And boom, the levels come through. I download them from mod.io. So I'm actually exercising the production system here. And there are 14 levels, which I kind of promoted instead of being a player created mod. I just used code to bake them into the game. And sweet, I just got levels from my mates. I didn't need to do that. What I was doing instead of making levels was taking this tiny little opportunity I had here to polish where I could. I completely redid the menu skin. Remember, it used to just be blue with Unity's default font and buttons. Now it looks much, much better. We've got our logo there. We've got custom font and buttons. And I managed to squeeze that 3 hours in and made such a huge difference to the game. And with that, it brought us to an end. So the key takeaways here is this concept of using technical experimentation in a game jam. I learned so much about mod.io in such a short time. It might have normally taken me like 2 weeks to get as far as I did in that 48 hours. And it was actually fully exercised. I had my friends use it, upload levels to me, and all that. That was awesome. But the big twist here is the other stuff that was sacrificed. I only had moving and jumping. It wasn't even recognizably a platformer. There was no bouncing, no spikes, no enemies. So I feel like I sacrificed the concept of the game and the scope to get this far. In retrospect, this would have worked a lot better if there was someone else who did the standard work. If there was a second programmer, they did the gameplay mechanics and pushed the games normally. And then on the side, I did the mod.io integration. It would have been amazing because then we'd have a good game plus a really unique extra feature, which would have made that game stand out so much more. The more you know for next time, right? But the other con here was the general workflow was just so much more stressful because I didn't have that confidence that I'm done, I'm safe, I have a game that I'm going with, and now I'm just adding more to it. It was just right at the end. You could see the official levels came in like an hour before submission. Before that, I had no levels in the game. Like, what the hell? It was really stressful. So that's one of the cons you need to be careful of if you don't have that second person who's doing the standard work. The other takeaway here is just this concept of crowdsourcing. I hadn't involved friends in my game dev process like this in the past. I mean, one thing is when you're on a team and you're working as a team, but my friends weren't game devs. One of them, they're both teachers, English teachers. So I just gave them a call like, hey, I need your help, get involved now. And, they're pretty excited. They like playing games. So they were excited to get involved in that process. And I've learned now I can actually engage them in much more of my work. I do that with my indie games. I just had fun doing some amateur voice acting with some friends. And so now that's a takeaway you can do in your own work and in game jams as well. So I'm going to bring it to a conclusion now. So I hope you've learned that there's so much to gain from these game jams. I won't repeat all the little benefits here, but I'll go through the strategies that hopefully you can try to apply to make your game jams more effective. Most important is about cutting the scope. You've got to cut the scope as much as you can. and then cut it more and just keep cutting it. And once that's done, and you actually start the work, try to have that end in sight. The extreme version, which I did with Unital, was literally make the UI and had that visual end in sight, just missing the gameplay in the middle. But even if you can't go to that degree, try to understand how players are going to interact with this game before you start making it, because that's going to guide your development so much. Only once the scope is complete, the core bits are complete, you should consider polishing or adding features. Once it's complete, you've got a game you can play. You can also sense what polish and what features would benefit the game the most. So you have a lot of extra insight into what the game needs. Cool. So next is optimize for collaboration. So an example is copy pasting level design from Excel. That was super effective as a collaboration tool. If that can apply to your game, especially if you're making puzzle games, do that. If it's not a puzzle game, find other ways. The key thing this is giving you is a shortcut where work can start before the game is technically ready. That's creating a lot more time for your game and level designers. You also want to nail down or work on the concept or theme ASAP, so artists know what they're doing straight away. They can visualize their work and get rolling on that as soon as they can. So I was part of the discussions where we got to the idea of repair kits instead of me just diving into the tech and tunnel visioning there, because that unblocked everyone, and that helped with the collaboration on that front. And also the idea of involving friends, not teammates, anyone you can, collaborating wider. That's a great idea as well. Furthermore, you want to always leave time for polish. You can see in Neanderthal, there was just a little bit of time, a couple of hours towards the end, and even just 2 hours was able to make a massive, massive difference there. And then there's this concept of doing hyper-focused fast learning where you're doing something more experimental with the goal of just learning about it really quickly. This is a great way to use game jams, but you need to know the risks. There is a lot that you could lose if you do that, if you're not prepared. And this could work a lot better if you're not the only one who's responsible for whether it's the code or the art or the music. It could work. It could be a huge benefit for the group if there's someone else who's doing the standard stuff and you're doing the unique stuff, which is going to make your game look fresh and new. And with that all said, thank you for listening. And yeah, I'm open for any questions. I think we've got some time on this live chat for questions before we jump over to Games with Wings.
Yep, thank you very much for that, Bilal. Okay, if you do have any questions, please put them into the chat. Unfortunately, Bilal can't see that, but I'll be able to read them out for him. So just to get you started, Bilal, while we're waiting for questions to come through. So Neanderthal came pretty close, but have you ever had a game jam where it just went terrible? At the end of it, there was no game.
I've had a game jam. I'd say it's hardly any game. Like, we had this idea for a game, which had all these things, and we got like pretty much none of it done, but technically it was still a game. So I consider that one kind of a failure, because like if you played the game, you'd be like, what am I doing? Like, it was like just a bare minimum to be called a game. But actually, before I got into game jams, when I was more in the corporate side of things, I used to do things called hackathons, which are like the non-game versions of game jams. It's more services and things, but it's still a 48-hour rush situation. And the first time I did a hackathon was just an utter failure. And it was 48 hours, and by the 36-hour mark, I had this like beautiful, well-engineered, I had continuous integration and continuous deployment, but it was just a login screen, essentially. So there was no product, there was no service, it was just a login screen. And I'd used 75% of the jammer. And I stopped and like, something's wrong here. And I hadn't like slept. I was going hard out at this amazingly engineered login screen. I'm like, I've got this completely wrong, haven't I? And so I just waved the white flag and gave up on that one. So that I kind of learned by getting burned in that regard. And that was where I didn't cut scope at all. And I'm like,
yeah, I'm going to do this excellent engineering, and yeah.
And what about you mentioned on repair kits that the music, when the music was first made, it was a little darker than the gameplay was. With hindsight, being 2020, was there any way you think you could have got around that in that communication with the person who was creating the music, with the musician?
Yeah, it's a tricky one because I think this was one of the cases where the musician was part of multiple groups. So it wasn't dedicated to our game, and we couldn't spend the same amount of time with him as with the other members to try to get that concept across. In hindsight, I feel like if we showed him like the birds, because we had the models pretty early on before they were properly skinned and all that. Uh, I feel like if he saw those, and then that might have been a good indicator because when we first expressed it with words, like it's a game where you're pairing birds together, it doesn't really tell you that much. But if he saw how cute the little pair was, like, yeah, maybe that's what we should have done. But I guess we kind of thought like, okay, it's on his side of the fence, and we kind of all went into our own little bubble. So yeah, it would have been good to be a bit more considerate of that, and show him things as they were progressing, so he could factor that in.
And how was that conversation? When you had to, did you say to him, "Oh, look, we think the music's maybe a little dark for this sort of game," or was this something where he just went, "Oh, no, I get it now. Sorry, guys, I'm gonna go away and do a different piece of music."
It was a bit of both. I think we kind of just like glossed over it a little bit, like, huh, it sounds a little odd, but it's good, thanks, man. But then when he actually sat and played the game, when we had a playable version, it was like crystal clear to him. So we didn't really need to explain that much further.
That's good. Okay, we've got a question here from Stephen. Do you have any advice for teams without dedicated artists or musicians?
So that I've used my experience with Uni Tower as an example for that, flying back. So what I did to avoid the problem of music and art, because I'm a hopeless musician and artist, uh, I I deconstructed the design so that I don't need art skills. Like I drew boxes. And you don't need art skills to just draw singularly colored boxes. So you can think of geometrical games where you have shapes and outlines, lines and such. There's also like tower defenses which have that geometrical style. So I feel like you end up with something more cohesive. You do that. There's other options, which is like going through the asset store to download assets, but that runs the risk of not ending up with a consistent feeling. So my personal opinion is having a consistent art style is more important than having individual elements that look good. Even if they look good, but they don't kind of mesh well together, it just won't feel as good at the end. So you can make something consistent with like hardly any actual art there, which is kind of what I did with Unical. On the music side of things, um, there's honestly there's heaps of free stuff out there. I mean, it's awesome to use real musicians when available. I mean, it brings that extra whole level to your game. This music was made for our game. It feels so great, and it sounds great usually as well. But what I did in Unitower, I googled a while around, and again, I was looking for consistency here. I think I ended up with royalty-free music from a single author, and I picked a few of his songs because they sounded like they were a set, and that set kind of fit my game. You know, it didn't fit nearly as well as say Lonely Birds one did because that music was made for the game. Yeah, but it definitely did the job. And compared to having no music, there was a huge difference. Talking about sounds as opposed to music, there are you could either go a similar path where you look for royalty-free sounds. I took the time in Unitel to actually try generating my own. So I'm not a sound engineer. I'm not talking about like getting pots and pans, scraping them and recording them. I used software called BFXR in this case. There are other examples, which was a sound generator. And this basically had a bunch of tunes and dials and presets, and you could press them and they'll make a sound like, and it will just run through heaps of them, and you'll pick one. That one sounded like I could use that for when the tower shoots a split shot. I can use that one for when an enemy dies. I spent, I think, 2 hours on VFX. It was actually really good fun doing that, and that was the first time I used it. So I had no sound experience, and that looked fun for me. So there are options for you in that regard.
Thank you very much for that answer, and thank you for the question, Stephen. Now we have a very good question from a familiar name, Andrew Shelshear. What kind of games would you stay away from in a game jam?
Okay, I would stay away from games with mod systems. I don't know why.
You've learned your lesson.
Yes, indeed. I would avoid multiplayer unless you have a big team and you're using, say, a system that solves a lot of the problems for you. If you're using like Unreal Engine, for example, that gives you heaps of multiplayer stuff out of the box. But even so, it's multiplayer just is a big beast. You know, it's not just the gameplay. You need the menus, like how do people browse the servers, and what happens if they get disconnected? You need a pop up, and so it just kind of makes it so much more work just by being multiplayer. But if you have a big team, you have multiple programmers, that could be something you take on. But that's something I'm like, no, I'm not going anywhere near that personally. What else? Open world. I mean, these are things which just scream like, I am a lot of work. And these are all possible. Like if you again, if you have big teams, but those are things that I'm staying away from. In general, now during game jams, I try to make the whole game fit on one screen, and that means I'm removing the whole complexity of camera management. I don't need to worry about when the character walks off screen, make sure that it pans and does it smoothly. It's not jerky. You don't need to deal with zooming in and out. So I try to simplify the games I'm making in that regard. Other than MMOs, essentially, I'm not sure what else I would specifically avoid. One thing I want to try, sorry, just going on a tangent here next time, it's like a Discord game or like a Twitter game where I'm actually making a bot rather than like a game executable. So then, yeah, I don't know why I said that. It just came to my mind. But yeah.
You've just given away the idea that you're going to use for your next game jam. We're all going to do it now. So
Next game jam is an up-top.
Yes. So have you ever, for anyone who's ever done a game jam, a lot of them do come with themes that you have to incorporate as you saw through some of the ones that you've just done. But those themes aren't given to you until the last minute. It's when the jam starts, they go, okay, the theme is blah. Have you ever had it happen where the theme has been revealed and you've just sat there going, I haven't got a clue. I've got no ideas.
Kind of. Going back to that first that game jam I said where the game turned out like, what is this game? I think the theme for that was home. The theme was home. And we were just like, home. Like, should it be a home organization game? Not really what we kind of wanted to make. And so that was kind of like, that left us a bit And we ended up making a game which was like really loosely related to the concept of home, where it's like you're lost out in space and you want to get home. And that was kind of the only tie to it. The actual game didn't have anything to do with home. It wasn't like Repair Kits where we managed to embed the theme into the name of the game. Even so, that was a bit more of a struggle. It might have been because of the nature of the people on the team, and we wanted to make a certain type of game, which we couldn't really tie that to the theme one way or another. Not sure.
Just think, you almost made the Marie Kondo game. If you'd done the home organization game, you could have licensed it to her.
I think there's also an indie game called Unpacking a Life. I think that's what it's called, which is just that. It's awesome. If you haven't seen it, you can check that out.
Excellent. Okay, it doesn't look like we have any other questions. So I think we'll draw this to a close and we'll head over to the Games with Wings Discord. I will put a link for that into the chat right now. So if you want to head over there, myself and Bilal will be there. We'll be hanging out for a while. If you have any other questions for Bilal that you'd like to ask him, you can definitely do that there. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending tonight. I think we had 20 concurrent viewers, which is pretty good. If you could do us a favor, if you did enjoy the talk, please click on like. If you want to see talks that are coming up, click on subscribe. We're so close to getting our custom URL that I can taste it. We need 5 more subscribers. But yes, thank you very much. Keep an eye on our meetup group. And as I say, you know, if you do subscribe to the channel and you click, I think it's a bell icon, you'll get notified when we put new videos up and when we're doing new Sydney Game Developers meetups. Yes, thank you very much, everyone. We will see you over there in the Discord channel shortly. I hope you all have a good night.
Alrighty.